Hi, I'm Scott from ByTheBrush Miniatures, and today I'm going to show you how you can sculpt on your minis to make them unique. Here are just a few examples of some of the things you can do. These two here are a little hard to see because they've actually been primed, so you can't really tell what's sculpted onto them and what's not. But on this one here, just this weapon, you can see it's not been very well sculpted. It's just quickly done. You can obviously spend more time on it and achieve a better result. This one here has some fur here that's been all sculpted, and this cape is also sculpted. It's not a very detailed one, but you can there are a few techniques that I'm going to show you to make it look a bit better. This one here has all this fur, which is all sculpted from green stuff. This one here has some fire on his weapon, which is also sculpted there. I'm going to show you exactly how you can replicate some of these effects, and we're going to start with what I think is the easiest one, which is the fur here. So before we start sculpting, we're going to have to go through everything that you're going to need, and what you're going to need for this is some modelling putty. And you can use any kind of modelling putty, but for this I've opted to use green stuff from Citadel. It's a very widely spread one. Comes in a little packet like that. You're going to need yourself some clean water, you're going to need a knife, and then you're going to need a sculpting tool. And for this one I'm actually just going to be using this sort of cocktail stick type thing. And that's all you're going to really need for the fur one. You might need a bit more tools when you're doing other kind of sculpting or what have you, but for now we're just going to stick to this stick. You can use any kind of tool that you want, but this works for me. Now the number one rule when you're working with green stuff, or any modelling putty really, is that you have to keep the green stuff, your fingers and any tools that you're using wet, otherwise it's actually just going to stick to the green stuff and you don't want that. So green stuff, as most modelling putties are, not all of them but most of them, it actually comes in two parts. It's a two-part putty. So what you're going to need to do is, again, make sure everything's wet. Not too wet, you don't want it drenched, otherwise it'll just not work. And then you need to take about, I would say 66%, 2/3 yellow, then 1/3 blue. And another rule to remember is that you shouldn't ever use the middle, because that's actually where they've met already, and that means that the green stuff's already going to be hardened down the middle. You're already going to get an effect like this where it's nice and hard, but you don't really want to be sculpting with that because it's obviously not going to work. So now that you've got your two parts like this, we're just going to mix them together, and you're going to start by getting a dot of water just on your fingers, rub them together, make sure that it's nice and damp, and then do the same on the green stuff. You should have damp fingers already, so you don't really need to worry about it too much. Then you're just going to start mixing it in this sort of twisting motion is the best way to mix it, I find. Just keep mixing it until you get sort of a green colour that's similar to that. It can be quite tough at times, and if it gets too tough, that's when you know you probably need to go and buy some more green stuff. There, now we finally got this nice green colour, and just again making sure it's wet. Now for this fur effect, you're just going to squish it a little bit. Best thing I found to do if you want to put it over a model is actually roll it into a shape like that, and then put it over the model's shoulders, and then sort of roll it up at the edges where it's kind of hanging off a bit like this. You can make a sort of cloak-esque type thing and then squish it together. But for this example I'm just going to not be putting it on a model, and I'm going to squish it out like this so I can just show you the technique. So once you've got this, all you need to do is find a surface, which will probably be the model if you're putting it on a model. I tend to make sure that my thumbnail is wet, and quite wet at that, because you're probably going to be resting on it if you've got any bits hanging off. And the first thing you want to do is you want to get this bottom edge, and you're going to be using the cocktail stick for this now, so make sure that's wet. Then you're just going to kind of do this motion here. Just going to do that along the bottom and then on the top, and you're creating this sort of layers, and it does look like a bit of a fur pelt when you create enough layers over each other. And make sure you do go all the way to the edge, otherwise you get quite a round looking face with just some fur texture on it that looks a bit strange, so I do make sure that you go right to the edge. And with that done, you can see we've got a really nice fur effect beginning to form, and now you can do what I did and you can actually sculpt it off the model and then put it on, or you can do what I did on this one where you can roll it up and squish it into the areas and then do the effect on. It's normally a bit easier to do it that way. Now, using the same bit of green stuff, I'm now going to show you how you can do a cloak or something like that, and this is a bit of an easier one because it is pretty much just manipulating a flat piece of green stuff, and you're not going to need this. I don't tend to use this, but you might want to use this other end of it, the blunt end, and I'll show you why in a minute. So first what you want to do is you want to just flatten it out as much as you can. Don't make it too long. You want it to kind of be like a bit of a circle or a square, as sort of equal as you can get it. And the key here is to not make it too thin. I've made that mistake before, and I can tell you all it does is it makes the cape actually really brittle, and then to the point where, you know, you'll spray any kind of paint on it and it'll already start to come off, and you don't want that. So what you're going to do is you're going to get your knife, make sure it's wet. I should also mention to make sure the surface that you're putting the green stuff on is also wet, otherwise it will just stick. There. And you can see here I'm starting to get some fingerprints on it, and all that means is you've got to wet your green stuff and then give it a bit of a rub, because otherwise you'll get fingerprints on the finished product, and you don't want that. So what you're going to do is you're just going to cut it into a nice equal shape. You're going to slice the ends off here. Again, if your green stuff's wet enough, you're doing it to be quite wet for this technique, and if your knife is wet enough, then you should be able to get a nice clean cut without it sticking. And just keep slicing so you get a good equal shape. Then when you get to the top, what you want to do is you want to not really cut it as normal. You're going to make this sort of shape. This is for a Space Marine in particular, so it depends what they've actually got on their back. If they've got a big backpack like this, you want this to go quite low down to fit around the Space Marine's power pack. And if you're doing something like a Stormcast Eternal for Age of Sigmar, then you won't actually need that much of a gap, because he's not really got anything to fit through there, so you can just make a smaller one. Then all you need to do is pick it up and then literally place it around the shoulders like that. And this one's it's a bit small, so you can make a bigger one around the shoulders. And then all you need to do is, if you want to put any ripples very specifically in, you can obviously manipulate it just by doing that, moving it around. What you can do is you can actually put this on either side depending on which side you want to make the ripple, making sure it's wet. Then you just bend it around and then pull it out, and you've got yourself a ripple. And then right next to it, just push it up like that. And if you're doing that, it actually kind of works better if you wait for it to semi-dry first. So if you give it an hour to dry, then you can try this technique on it afterwards, and then it'll actually work a bit better. Now I'm going to show you how you can sculpt some fire, and again you're going to just need some green stuff and make sure it's very wet. You're not really going to need a knife for this bit necessarily. You'll obviously need a knife to get the green stuff off first, but I'm just using this same piece of green stuff now. So first thing you want to do is you want to make a body for the flame, and this works for, say, if you want to make an actual just fire sort of body and then flames coming off of it, or if you want to do something like this. You can just sort of adapt it to the shape that you need, and I would separate this in half so you've got something a bit like this. Then use this for the body of the flame. All you need to do is twist it like that. And if it's something like that, just flatten it out along the edges, and then we'll revisit that later when we start doing some of the other techniques to finish off the flame. This is for one flame, bearing in mind that on this I have quite a few big flames like this, and then the little ones I'll show you how to add later on. And what you're going to need for this is, again, just a cocktail stick or something like that. It depends what tool you want to use. You might have a dedicated tool, but this will do just finely. Then what you're going to do is you're going to come across it, you're just going to grab and pull and make some licks of flame just like that. Don't worry if the end starts to curl, because all that's going to do is sort of add to the naturalness of the flame. And here where it starts to come off, you can actually pull it off there, that end, and you can see we've got a nice little lick there. And if you keep doing that and sort of spinning it as you do it, you don't need to worry about it going too wrong, because you need to remember that flame isn't actually a uniform thing and it's not always going to look the same. So if it starts to pull off in directions or do things like this, don't worry about it. You can just squish it back on sort of anywhere and then just use this same technique all around to try and make something that looks a little bit like fire. So as you can see, we've now ended up with something like this, which does look a little bit at the minute more like a lumpy ball of green stuff. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to add some really deliberate flames, and we're going to just take small balls of green stuff. We're just going to roll it up like this. You can see that gravity's starting to take effect, and if you don't want that to happen, just every now and then just give it a bit of a push. It will start to stand up eventually as the green stuff starts to dry. So roll it out. And then what I like to do is I like to fold it over, and then grab the two folded tips and just start to spin it like we were doing before. And you get something that looks a little bit like that. And then what we're going to do is, it works quite well if you stick it kind of on the end of the whatever tool that you happen to be using. Just grab hold of it like that, and then take your flame, find a place on it, and then just stick it on wherever you want it. And you can do that numerous times until you end up with something that looks a little bit like this. This is probably the first one I've ever done, so I do have some better examples of that on my Instagram if you want to go down and have a look below in the description. So after you've started with some basic sculpting like that, capes, fire, furs, you can start to develop your sculpting into things that you really want to do, and you can really sort of take an idea you've got and then just experiment like I've done here. So that's all we're going to be doing today. I would really appreciate it if you followed some of the links in the description below to support me and everyone else at ByTheBrush Miniatures. Thank you for the view, and subscribe for more.